Days after Defence Minister Rajnath Singh announced the Agnipath scheme for the armed forces, protests have erupted in several parts of the country. Protesters turned vandals with reports of violence coming in from Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Rajasthan and Haryana. In Bihar's Chhapra, protesters set a train on fire. According to a statement by the East Central Railway, 22 trains had to be cancelled and rescheduled due to the disruptions. In many parts, police had to resort to baton charges and tear gas to disperse the mobs. Protesters have rejected the new scheme, claiming it's against the ethos of the Indian Armed Forces. Now, you have certain sets of people who are protesting. You have youth who are protesting, who say that they want a chance to be a part of this recruitment, and this cutoff at 21 is not working for them. They want an extension or they want a longer tenure. Then you have a host of political parties in the opposition who are questioning the Agnipath scheme as well. You have certain veterans of the armed forces who are raising question marks as well. Now, just a few days after the scheme was announced and called out-of-the-box thinking, a radical change to recruitment in the Indian Armed Forces, why all of this furor? To understand this, I'm joined now by Sushant Sareen, a Strategic Affairs Analyst and Senior Fellow at ORF. I'm also speaking with Maroof, Raza, Strategic Affairs Expert. Welcome to both of you, and thank you so much for speaking with us on the India Development Debate. Maroof, let me begin with just your take on what are the drawbacks of the scheme which now seem to have come to the fore? On the face of it, it sounds like a great idea, right? You're widening the pool. You're giving people a chance to enter the armed forces for 4 years, and if it doesn't work for them, they have an exit with a neat sum of money at the end of it. And you get to pick and choose, you lower your pension costs. So why all the problems now?
Well, as I mentioned to one of your colleagues, the whole package is a mixed bag. It is not entirely a harebrained idea. Neither is it entirely doable and will obviously have ripple effects for a long, long time. The second thing is, and before I go on to a critique of this idea, let me say I don't agree with the youth that are agitating about this initiative to say, why the age up to 21 and not 25? Because firstly, we must understand the military is more than a job. It is not just another job, not just another sarkari job. It is a question of a lifetime of commitment to becoming one with an organization which demands a much, much greater commitment than just payback for the salary that you receive. Having said that, the flaws, you asked me to point out the flaws. There are 3 or 4 big flaws in the idea. The first is this shouldn't have been considered as a route out to solve the pending pension problems because the military has a large pension bill. They needed to be, and the military officers needed to have found much better initiatives and ideas to address the financial drain of the pension, which soon will become more than the paycheck that is given to serving officers and soldiers. The second problem is to assume that these guys would come in, will become dyed-in-the-wool soldiers, and then eventually be an asset in society or being absorbed by the army or the paramilitary forces is rather far-fetched. Because firstly, you cannot create a mindset amongst people who are not willing to be there for a better part of their lives. To just say, come in for 4 years, experience the thrill of firing a weapon, wearing a uniform, wearing some extra badges and tags on your body to say that you're an Agniveer or give them whatever fancy name, doesn't make you what simple, straightforward soldiering is all about. You need to be there much longer. And neither can these guys who come in become the new source of technical manpower that is required to make the army shift from a manpower-intensive army to a technocentric army. Then you need to recruit people with a technocentric set of mindsets. The third thing is they are trying to create all-class recruitment in an army which has always delivered, which has stood the test of time, and which has regional recruitment patterns.
Yeah.
This works beautifully in the army. I have served in such a system, and there are officers who come from all class units, like, say, for example, the current army chief. He comes from the Corps of Engineers, where everybody else could be from anywhere. We could have a Sikh NCO leading a South Indian Jawan, but their skills are binding, are the engineering skills. In the fighting units, the infantry, the combat arms, and even the armored corps, it is your naam, nishan, your biradri, your family connections to the regiment, your village you come from, which for about 200 years in many regiments has been the binding force. Why undo something which is working well? Why do you want to destroy
that, in
something?
fact, is what some of the protesters are also saying today. That is also what some of the protesters are saying.
The last important point to understand is that you cannot create a body of men who you say 25% will be absorbed, another maybe 25% go into paramilitary forces or government jobs, and 50% go out into civil street, and they've got a taste of how the military works. They're disillusioned outside. They don't get jobs to their liking. And the skill sets that you provide them are not necessarily the skill sets that are required in civil street. So what are assets in war are an embarrassment in peace. And these guys could be picked up with any group having anti-national intention.
So on the law and order issue, the possible law and order issue. Okay, let me get Sushant in. Sushant, if, Maroof said it's a mixed bag, but what he's described is actually what's not working. So what really is working then?
I think everything which Maroof said is not working. I would agree with it. Some of the points I certainly agree with. But look, Tamanna, if you have a 200-year-old system and every time you make some change in it, there will be resistance. There will be resistance, and there will be a lot of people who will, ask why fix what's not broken. And there is a point to that, but I think the way this new system can work out, you can still have, for example, apart from the infantry units, I don't think the armored corps guys are from a particular region or a particular Bihar.
Many of them, the older regiments, they are.
Maybe in the older regiment, but most of armored corps is no longer a mixed thing. Artillery is entirely mixed. Your signal corps, your engineers, your ordnance, your supply corps, your education corps, medical corps, all of it, and all of it, very important parts of the army are mixed corps. Now, yes, there are some infantry regiments, predominantly, even infantry regiments, some of them are mixed. But most of them have a kind of a class composition and a caste composition. And I understand where Maroof is coming from, but where is it written that many of the young people whom you are now going to absorb will not be allocated regiments or fighting arms on the basis of, for example, their caste or class or region or whatever? That can be done even within the new system which is being evolved. So one is that. The second is where I disagree with Maroof, that, many of these guys will take to antisocial activities. Actually, I think when a normal soldier who's coming from the current stream retires at about 35 or 40, he is a lot less employable than somebody who goes through this training, this experience for about 4 years, and then enters the job market. He's far more malleable, far more adjustable. He has commitments. So I don't see much of a problem in that. Yes, you can certainly tweak this program a little bit more so that the guys who are going to be demobilized after 4 years, maybe you can have another 6 months or 1 year of some kind of specialized training in various fields, maybe something on computers, maybe something in a variety of other fields.
You mean leave them employable? You mean leave them employable in civilian life after that? But then what's the point, Sushant? My question is just to understand, what is in it for the armed forces? You are spending money, time, energy, training this group of people. You will recruit maybe 25% of them. What's in it for you to spend maybe 50% of the time just training?
Tamanna, one, I think the pension bill is a very important consideration. And I think it is that the armed forces and the government is looking at it at this stage and not after it becomes insurmountable. Okay. Both Maroof and I study a friendly neighborhood to the west, and we've seen the kind of mess they have made of their own country. And I don't think we should go anywhere close to that. So I think if we are taking evasive action at this point in time, we've done a lot of reform in the civil services, for example. A lot of the new recruits are not part of that old pension scheme. They're part of that, what is called the NPS. So we've done that in the civil service, but I think we need to do it in the armed forces as well. So one is that criteria. The second is, of course, you bring down the age profile of the soldiery to a point where, you have a much niftier kind of an army going forward. The third, I think the mistake which many people are making, Tamanna, to my mind, is that everybody is looking at that you have recruited 100 people and you are not looking at the 25 who will remain within the armed forces and go on to, have normal armed forces experience and bring in the requisite experience when new lot comes in after about 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Everybody is focused on the other 75%. Now, yes, how do you absorb them is an issue. It's going to be a challenge, especially if there is not the kind of job creation in the private sector. But I'm sure there are workarounds. One thing I want to say, Tamanna. Look, this scheme has been unveiled. People have gone on, deliberated over it over 2 years. But even after that, I think the government has made a statement or a couple of statements that they're ready to tweak it and adjust it if they feel there is a requirement.
On the deliberation, one minute.
And I see
my
no
question
reason
on
why
the deliberation, and I know Maroof wants to respond, is that in the last 2 days, 24 to 48 hours, you've seen a slew of announcements of places where the 75% can be absorbed, that they will be, given more help from the Ministry of Education. There are departments where they will be given priority, etc. Shouldn't that have been included in the original plan? If this has been deliberated for 2 years, it gives a sense that the government now is kind of scrambling to assuage all ends on a plan which was perhaps not as well thought out as it should have been, Sushant.
Look, again, that is partly one of the problems with the government that, it's a kind of a closed kind of a circle within which many of these plans have been discussed and they've been, fine-tuned, and they finally come out with the announcement. And it might have been a better idea, as some people have suggested, that maybe you could have gone through with a pilot project for about a couple of years. That was one possibility. The other possibility was that once you had come up with this scheme, perhaps you could have had a public discourse over it. Rather than saying that we are implementing it in the next 90 days, you could have said that, okay, over the next 2 months, we will have a kind of a public discourse. We will get opinions of all other people and we'll see what are the more implementable ones and we'll tweak it and come up with a final plan. Perhaps that could have been another option. But having done what they have done now, maybe they can go forward and, make a few adjustments in this scheme. I don't think intrinsically there is anything wrong in this scheme.
Okay. So tweak it. Maroof, you wanted to respond to a couple of points that Sushant made. If there's nothing intrinsically wrong, why this extent of backlash? And remember that just let me contextualize this. You're saying you don't agree with the protesters, and of course, but some of the protests are also because they're saying that we were waiting to give written exams. We couldn't give them for 2 years because of COVID. Now we've crossed that 21-year-old threshold, and that's not fair to us. So there's some groups of protesters who have a problem with that. Should they be given some sort of leeway?
Tamanna, now I hope you'll allow me some time because there are a lot of important points that I need to bring up and also counter some of the issues that Sushant has raised. You see, Sushant has made a very good point. Central point of his thrust is that they needed to have tweaked it further and they're probably going to tweak it further. But one of the reasons, for a moment, let's set aside the protesters because protesters will protest. They have a lot of other motivations and encouragement to protest. But let's get into the core of the scheme. The first thing is, I think when this was being deliberated, and it was being deliberated for some time, I know, in South Block. The problem was that there were so many areas of resistance that the government probably thought that let's just go ahead and raise a fate to comply in front of the military, that this is it, now go on and implement it. It is somehow akin to how there was a lot of resistance in the 80s in the US to the CDS equivalent scheme there. They call it the Chairman or Chiefs of Staff. And then the Goldwater Act was just thrust upon the military and said, go on and do it. So, like the CDS appointment here, for 20 years we deliberated over it. We couldn't come up with it. Or when we came up with it, we came up with a person who was acceptable to the government across the board. But the flaw in the scheme is that after his sudden departure, we seem to be now going back to the drawing board to ask ourselves what kind of a CDS or who could we have, as though nobody else in the chain of command is competent. That is bizarre. Now, go back to the scheme itself. Where are the problems? Sushant's point was that, yes, in the artillery, AC, ordnance, they are not fighting arms. They are supporting or logistics arms. When you've got to give your life, you've got to get people to stand there and follow the leader with just one command, follow me. He will do it because his biradari is with him. If he backs out, people will go to the village after the war, and as in case of Kargil or 71 or wherever, and tell them, ye bhagoda hai, ye buzdil hai. And he doesn't want that to be told in front of all his kith and kin. And therefore, he goes along with his brethren. In this kind of a situation, the bulk of these guys are going to be pushed into the infantry units. And with the exception of the mechanized infantry, which was a creation of General Sundarji, who initially took all caste units from Dogras, Jats, Gurkhas, Sikhs, etc., and then made them mechanized. So you had a Sikh NCO in Punjabi giving orders to a Manipuri who had also been put into the mechanized infantry. And that is something that is very, very complex to explain on a television show.
Okay.
But the point is they eat alike, they sleep alike, they die alike. And that is what the army works on. It's not just here, even in Pakistan.
But the point Sushant is making, he said you can do that even now. No, but Maroof, his response to this is you can do this even now from the pool.
You need to give me enough time to respond because you've given half the show to Sushant. Otherwise, just let Sushant give his comment.
No, I've been fair. And there's a lot of time left. Please continue, Maroof.
Yeah, so please let me. So the third point, and we must understand that, the military is a very complex organization and an animal. The skills that Sushant said that you need to further enhance for them to be employable outside. Please remember that 3/4 of India's graduates are unemployable. Here at that age group, 17 to 21, instead of hanging around the cafeteria or canteen, they are going in and doing some valuable work. They will pick up some team spirit. They will pick up discipline. They need to be further enhanced with skills. They need to be told that if you're going in for this model, then you are going to be compensated in the long run, not just by an 11.5 lakh package tax-free, but you will get absorbed because you have been molded now into a fairly sharp arsenal for the country to use. And finally, we must understand that it is important that technology per se will not help you win battles, even if it is being argued that this will help the army become a technocentric army. The US, with all its technology, lost in Afghanistan. The Russians, with all their technology, lost in Ukraine. Nothing works like Naam, Namak or Nishan, which is what is the war cry of every fighting man. You have to keep that going. Otherwise, you lose the war and you will lose your sovereignty and independence.
Let me address the question of a reduction of average age. I think we've not covered that point in this discussion, and we need to address it as well, because that was one of the benefits which we were told about when the scheme was announced, right? That your average age of the armed forces will come down from 32 to 26. Sushant, is that enough really to push through with this scheme as is? or, as you said, they will need to tweak it going forward, because there seems to be a broader pushback on the scheme than was probably expected?
Look, I don't take that pushback very seriously. Some of those guys were never going to get into the army anyways, number one. Number two, some of them are professional protesters. No matter what you do, even if you said that I'm going back to the old scheme, somebody will start protesting. So these protests are something which I take very seriously, especially the violent types. But on the other question, look, reducing the age profile is one criteria. That's not the sole reason for going in for this. That is one reason, and that's a very legitimate reason that you want to reduce the age profile of your armed forces. And a young person of 18 to 21, 22 years old, that kind of an age group, these are people, as the Raksha Mantri himself said, people who are able to take risks, people who are physically far fitter, and there are a whole range of other things which can be attached to them, and they can be used. That is one part of it. My slight points of disagreement with Maroof. One, for example, even in the fighting units, for example, the RR. RR is essentially an amalgam of people taken from various arms and various infantry units also. But the RR has done a remarkable job insofar as Kashmir is concerned. Now, yes, you can quibble that, a Kumaon regiment or Maroof would, of course, be a Garhwali. So, he would have some bias with that. But the way the RR has performed, that is one particular indicator. Secondly, I think, when you start talking about the Americans having lost in Afghanistan, look, the Americans did not lose a single engagement, a single battle. They lost the war. They lost the war because they were politically, they did not understand what they were fighting. Number one. Number two, it was terrible generalship. It was not because of the American soldier. It was because of the American generals and the American politicians and the American babus who did not see what the Pakistanis were doing and were not ready to take any action out there. Right. Even in Russia, there is a conscript army which is fighting, and you can quibble about it as much as you want to. But the fact of the matter remains that the Russians have been worsted in Ukraine, not for any other reason, not because there was conscripts, but because of bad generalship and bad political leadership, which did get into war with the kind of preparations what were required.
I have to wrap. So, I've run out of time.
Don't conflate.
Okay. One last word from you, Maroof, but I will have to ask you to keep it short because I need to wrap up.
Yeah. Just quick point. You see, we tried some of these mixed class models after 1984 when there was a bit of a rebellion in the Sikh regimental center. But then over a period of time, the army went back to the established region, caste, religion model, Garhwalis, Sikhs, Gurkhas, etc. being clubbed together in their regiment. So, and the RR also was raised initially for mixed class models, but now has come on to the Gurkha RR battalions, the Kumaoni RR battalion. So they are Rashtriya Rifle, but their lock, stock and barrel comes from the regiments they are affiliated to. And finally, the point about Americans was that technology and techno-savvy force per se will not help you overcome your challenges. You have to have your men and your commanders willing to fight. And that will only come if there is a binding engagement of life and limb with your regiment, and not that sir, मैं 4 साल का मेहमान हूँ, उसके बाद तो मैं जा ही रहा हूँ. So don't put me through all this fireworks and put me through all this nonsense.
So it has to be more. It has to be more than the pension. It has to be more than just an experience. It has to be a commitment. Thank you to both of you. I've completely run out of time. Maybe the scheme will have to go back to the drawing board for tweaks. Just one comment I want to make. Both of our guests kept talking about the men in the army. It was very clear Agnipath will be for men and women. So let's keep that in mind as well. Thank you so much.